So I always have to start by explaining the title. How to have nice things comes from something that people say around the office at Stack Exchange all the time or on the online chats, which is, this is why we can't have nice things. And it's usually because somebody is misbehaving on the internet in some way that requires you to shut down some amazing thing that you've just opened up because of some troll or somebody that's doing something bad. And the concept sort of comes from Clay Shirky, who wrote this paper in 2003, A Group is Its Own Worst Enemy. To put this in context, if you haven't heard of Clay Shirky, it's worth going back and finding him. He's a professor at the Interactive Technology program at NYU, and he's written a lot about online communities and how they organize and how they bring things together, how they do crowdsourcing and how crowdsourcing works. And in fact, one of his books, which was called Here Comes Everybody, was a little bit of the inspiration behind Stack Overflow, one of about 27 different things that inspired Stack Overflow. So the first theory in a group is its own worst enemy in this article, which you can just go Google that and you can read it online. It's a little bit long, so if I get boring, you can go ahead and bang on the Wi-Fi and download that. His basic idea in this talk is that when you start an online community, it always starts out great, and that's because you only have 24 of your own friends that are there and people that you've managed to pull in there. And the level of conversation is very high because everybody's sort of saying the main thing that they know about the topic, and everything seems to be going great, and people are complimenting you on how little spam there is in your online community, and how kind the people are to one another, and how little trolling and fooling around there is. So small communities always start out very high quality, and then the first teenager arrives. And not necessarily a teenager, but maybe somebody just with a mental ability of a teenager. And that starts to pull apart the community. The basic model that always happens, and the same thing always happens, and this is one of the things that Clay Shirky sort of made fun of, is because he says this is going to happen to you, and then you're going to write an essay about it, and you're going to blog about it as if you just discovered something, even though this stuff has been happening with online communities since the 80s. And what happens is that somebody gets bored with the actual game that you're playing. Somebody joins your community, and let's say your community is there to talk about collecting Harley-Davidson bike belt buckles. And so everybody has something to talk about with that, and at some point, there's somebody that is kind of used to using the community to entertain themselves in the evening, and they've run out of interesting conversation about belt buckles. And so they start kind of playing with the rules a little bit and trying to push the rules and trying to see what's actually allowed. They might actually go read the terms of service because they're so bored and notice that there is no specific rule against this specific thing, and so they'll just do that thing because it appears to be excluded by the rules but is nevertheless destructive. And that's a certain form of online trolling. And then the moderators will say, well, you can't do that even though it's allowed by the terms of service, and they will delete that post. And then the troll will say, well, why are you all deleting my post? This is censorship. I'm all in favor of freedom of speech. Censorship is obviously a bad thing. And then everybody agrees with that, right? Because we all know that censorship is a bad thing. And this leads to a gigantic flame war about whether or not you should have censorship on a discussion board that was intended to be talking about belt buckles. And that's the standard pattern. That always happens. Every single time. And the general rule that Clay said is it's really easy to have these high-quality small communities. When you have 20 people on a mailing list, it generally converges on something okay, but not for long. And when these communities, if the community is doing anything useful, then people join. And when people join, it gets big. And after a while, the communities kind of fall apart. Something bad will almost always happen, even if it's just that it becomes full of spam or that the quality goes down. Even some of the bad things that happen don't appear to be bad things. So on Usenet back in the day, for those of you that are old enough to get your programming answers from Usenet, there was this syndrome where the old-timers were sick and tired of hearing the same questions every September from the college kids who were taking their first C programming class. And so they would have these kind of RTFM type answers saying, please stop asking obvious things. And at some point, they instituted on many of the news groups on Usenet a principle that you can only really kind of ask new questions. And at that point, there's not that much to talk about in the C programming language. I mean, the whole book is that thick. And so to find anything that was legitimate to talk about was rarer and rarer, and these communities sort of self-destructed in a way because they would only talk about things that were so esoteric that they were irrelevant to any actual C programmer. But all the things that can go wrong with online communities all add up to somebody doing something bad online, and then the people that tried to make the community look at each other sadly and say, this is why we can't have nice things. So there are a very limited number of large online communities that have been successful these days. It probably seems like there's more than you think, but there's, there's Reddit, there's Wikipedia, online user-generated content type sites that don't immediately devolve into spam and scams and stuff like that. And so I have a little bit that I can tell you about Wikipedia and a little bit that I can tell you about Stack Exchange on how to have nice things, and that is the topic of my talk. So, dog pictures. This is my dog. I'm going to start with the basic question of why we can't have an article about him in Wikipedia. So this is Taco. He's pretty famous. He's the most famous dog on the Upper West Side, I'm pretty sure. I know there is a sticker pack if you get Trello Pro. There's a Taco sticker pack, so you can put little Taco stickers on the front of all your cards, where he is the spokes mascot, spokes dog. And that makes him somewhat famous. I use him for pictures on my blog, which I don't update very often. So it seems like he should be famous enough to merit an article on Wikipedia, but unfortunately he's not that famous, and this article does not exist as of the last time I checked. Please don't write it, because you're going to defeat the whole purpose. No, somebody will delete it, don't worry. So basically my question is, why can't there be an article on Wikipedia about Taco? First of all, there would certainly be enough information to put on there. We have all these facts about him. Some of them are documented here. The fact that he's a Siberian Husky, that he's male, that he's neutered, that he was born on January 1st, it's true. And it says that he weighs 45 pounds, but I just weighed him the other day and he was 55 pounds. So we could update that using the Wikipedia feature allowing you to update things. We have his vaccination history and stuff like that. He looks like he's due for a rabies vaccine. There's other facts that are not perfectly well documented, but are nevertheless true. For example, he generates over 10 tons of floof per week. This is not a joke, you could actually make a sweater every single day out of the fur that this dog generates. And I have a picture to document that. I also know that when he was a puppy, he liked to chew on wires. So that's just another fact about him that could go in this article, in the, history section or biography. So why can't I make a Wikipedia article? Sorry, I don't know why that slide is there. If I did make a Wikipedia article, it would be deleted. And the reason it would be deleted is because of this funny rule they have on Wikipedia called Wikipedia:"notability," or also known as WP:"N. They would say, Taco is not notable, you cannot have an article about him. Just to read the specific rules, Wikipedia articles cover notable topics, those that have gained sufficiently significant attention by the world at large and over a period of time, ... We consider evidence from independent sources to gauge this attention. And so they have this rule that says that reliable independent sources, which has a technical definition on Wikipedia, are needed to establish that, something is notable enough to have a topic. And basically, when this rule started coming about, if you were paying attention to the internal debates among the Wikipedians, it was not a foregone conclusion that this rule should exist, and there was a lot of debate about it. And in fact, when Wikipedia was created, it didn't have this rule. And in fact, if you read Clay Shirky's 2003 book, Here Comes Everybody, in which he goes on and on about how amazing Wikipedia is, I'm pretty sure that either they didn't have the rule or he didn't think it was a good idea, because he treats Wikipedia as if it didn't have a notability rule. There were a bunch of arguments that were made, as recently as 5-6 years ago, before the rule kind of cemented, saying things like, the internet is not running out of pages, which is a humorous nerd way of saying, we can always make more pages. We don't have to limit the number of pages on Wikipedia. We can have a page about every single dog in the world without running out of something. I'm not going to run out. And it's clear that having a page about my dog would make the internet better, I believe, especially on Wikipedia. For example, when I asked my friends to walk him, they could do research beforehand to prepare for their walk, things that they would have to know. And afterwards, after the walk, they could add their own knowledge about walking taco, if they learned anything that they didn't see in the article, they could just go hit edit, and they could add it right there for the next dog walker. Facts such as, do not let Taco pick up smaller dogs in his mouth, which I learned after a couple of years, sort of a hard-won piece of knowledge that if you found this out, you would want the other dog walkers to be aware of that, at least. Okay. So all of these complicated rules, you still can't have an article about Taco on the Wikipedia, not notable enough. And all these rules are actually, there is kind of a theory that was circulating a lot about a year ago saying, this is pissing people off. They come to Wikipedia, they read all about it, probably in Clay Shirky's book or in some article in Time magazine, and they discover, hey, I should write an article about something that I know something about. And then they'll go write an article about, their grandfather's service in World War II or their dog. And then because it's not notable and is lacking in citations and is not published in books and so forth, the Wikipedians will immediately delete that article and they'll cite Wikipedia notability without much explanation and without really trying to explain to anybody why they have that rule. And this makes people bitter and angry. And this appears, all of this, you cannot do that on Wikipedia, appears to be leading to fewer and fewer people who are willing to take the time to continue to contribute to Wikipedia, and I'll show you some statistics on that in a second. But the first time I noticed that this was possibly related was this article that showed up in the Atlantic Monthly about how Wikipedia is running out of admins. An admin is a Wikipedian's term for somebody who edits articles. And that article sort of went on saying, Wikipedia has some strict rules, and people come and they get hit by these rules and they get angry and they leave. And the community appears to be contentious, and so there's some leaving. Now, this particular article on the website, on the Atlantic website, was exceptionally interesting because of the comments at the bottom of the article, which is probably the first time in the history of the world that has happened, that the comments were interesting enough. But I have some quotes from the comments because they do actually show you what the people are thinking. So let me just quote a few of them. I wanted to give editing Wikipedia a shot last year. It was nothing but headaches. Whole articles with sources that I typed up were deleted because some random admin didn't think the topic was notable enough. Somebody else wrote, notability is a bullshit criterion to begin with. What is notable to one group may be of no interest to another. This is, by the way, a mistake because in Wikipedia terms, notability doesn't actually mean notable. It means has a bunch of independent, reliable third-party sources. And so they're using the word, they've decided to what's the word for that when you steal a word and use it for something else? I don't know. They're using the word to mean something very, very specific and technical, meaning this subject, and everybody interprets the word notable to just be the plain English meaning of the word notable, and this is causing confusion in this person's mind. What is notable to one group may be of no interest to another. If the latter group holds power, if something is true, but somebody publishes that it's false in some big magazine or newspaper, the false fact edits get protected and people posting the true facts get blocked or banned. This is actually correct. This is what happens on Wikipedia. If you have a bunch of citations that say something, that's what is allowed to be in Wikipedia. And if you happen to know the truth because you were there and you go and try to edit those facts in Wikipedia, which are just reflecting the newspapers, it'll get reverted. Here's another person saying, this is why I stopped contributing. I had a discussion with 3 admins who teamed up to remove facts that I had added, who argued that Wikipedia's rules were more important than provable facts. Most risible was the claim that if anyone disagreed with a fact, it was a matter of opinion. Proving the fact was dismissed as original research. So if you get into an argument with the Wikipedia admins and then you go out and you take a photograph showing that you are actually correct, that indeed Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania, and you show it on a map and so forth, and you create that level of proof, then they say, well, that's original research. We need secondary sources. Utterly absurd, so I give up and let evolution take its course, said Nemo last year. So far, there has not been any evolution that has displaced Wikipedia, but that's interesting. Okay, there was another funny story after that, shortly after that in Ars Technica. Wikipedia told Philip Roth, the famous novelist, that he is not a credible source on a book that he wrote. Roth tried to fix the error that his novel, The Human Stain, was, quote, allegedly inspired by the life of the writer Anatole Broyard, which it wasn't. When Roth tried to give Wikipedia the true origins of the novel, he says he was told by a Wikipedia administrator on August 26th that I, Roth, was not a credible source. And this is what the admin said. I understand your point that the author is the greatest authority on their own work, coincidentally using the same word. But we require secondary sources, were the exact words of the Wikipedia administrator, according to Roth. So there was no, you might think it's a question of like, do we really know that this is Philip Roth? But actually, they were saying, no, I understand that you're Philip Roth and that you know what motivated you to write that article, but that's not good enough to get a fact into Wikipedia. And that's obviously, based on the snickering, that's obviously ridiculous. And what that is leading to, according to The Atlantic, and obviously all the people commenting on The Atlantic seem to have indicated, based on how much they've given up on contributing to the Wikipedia, that might be true, that the number of people that are willing to contribute to Wikipedia is going down. So there's a number of active editors, and it has gone down from a peak of 51,285. What's an editor? An editor in Wikipedia terminology is somebody who makes 5 changes, 5 edits in a single month. And that's a nice metric of somebody that is not just occasionally going in there and updating some wrong fact that they find or adding a little fact that they know. But actually, if you've made 5 changes in a month, you're pretty important to Wikipedia. And so the peak that they ever hit, given that Wikipedia touches basically every human being on the planet, it's cool that 51,000 people a month being actively involved was enough to generate all that content. But that number has now fallen below 30,000, where we stand right now. So it's way down from a peak. There's sort of other problems with the contributors. I don't know where to fit this in, but 91% of those people are male. OK, so this is obviously a terrible thing. But wait, so let me just do a little logical argument here, which is to give you the Wikipedia side on that. The people in the room that know this have been patiently sitting on their hands instead of shouting out that I'm an idiot. Here's my little logical proof. If Wikipedia were to allow articles about everyone's dog, so you had 1 article per dog, and those dogs were not famous enough to have books that had been written about them, and magazine articles and so forth, then there would be no possible way of fact-checking these articles about dogs. They would have to come to your house. They would have to come to your house and talk to your dog, I guess. The fact-checking would be a sort of an unaccomplishable burden. Taco, in particular, would deny ever chewing on any wires. In fact, my boyfriend doesn't even remember that this happened. I know because I had to solder the wires together after the fact. And he's like, nah, he didn't do that. Nobody could fact-check those articles. And this is the important part. Wikipedia would fill up with wrong facts if this were the case. So merely allowing an article about something that is not famous enough and not notable enough will cause there to be wrong facts on Wikipedia. And that leads to a common misunderstanding by most people. I guess if you walked out the door here and did a survey of what's going on Wikipedia, there's this common misunderstanding where you have sort of this little Venn diagram of all the true information in the world and all the verifiable information in the world. And you kind of wish that Wikipedia would fill up with true information. And people might think, hey, it's just all kinds of true information. And when Wikipedia is done, it will have all the information in the world all neatly organized. And then if you tell them, well, the trouble is that there's certain facts that there's no way to establish whether or not they're true or false. That stuff could not possibly be on Wikipedia. And then they would say, oh, I see what you mean. So maybe we should only have the true information that is also verifiable. And then you tell them, no, well, there's still no way to know it's actually true just because you verified it. And so, in fact, what we do have on Wikipedia is just the verifiable information, the stuff that we can actually verify in some way, which is a much lower bar than true information. Wikipedia is not a repository of world knowledge or true facts, which a lot of people think that it's supposed to be or that it was supposed to be at some point. In fact, most people would say that's what it is. It's a repository of world knowledge. It's just a summary of what authorities, for some value of authorities, currently consider to be true. And this is a much less ambitious goal, but at least it's possible. This is something you can actually do. In Wikipedia terminology, the Wikipedians say that they are a tertiary, meaning third source. Not primary, not secondary, tertiary, meaning they don't actually have the fact, and they're not quoting somebody that has the fact. They're quoting somebody that's telling you about somebody that quoted somebody that sort of some levels of indirection. And unfortunately, this is the best that is possible using the current state of the world's ability to determine the truth of things, whether things are true or not. That's the best we can do. Here's a quote from the Chronicle of Higher Education. The Chronicle of Higher Education is a sort of, it's sort of the trade magazine of academia. And they're kind of famous for having an article every single month about some outrageously wrong thing that they found on Wikipedia and how horrific it is that that wrong thing survived on Wikipedia. But they finally figured it out over there. And so they wrote that Wikipedia is verifiability of reliable sources. And they point out that if most secondary sources which are taken as reliable happen to repeat a flawed account or description of something, Wikipedia will echo that. And they're presenting this merely as fact, and I would actually am trying to state here that that's a virtue because at least it's verifiable. So one of the things that happens on Wikipedia regularly is that the current true knowledge of something, the current state of scientific knowledge may actually advance beyond what's on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia will continue to cover the old wrong facts that are commonly published in textbooks until the textbooks kind of change their mind. So a lot of times there will be new scientific research that has not yet made it to the point of a published article that is nevertheless starting to be in a lot of people's heads, and a lot of people are realizing, hey, you know what, that is actually the truth, and what we've been teaching students all these years in the textbooks and publishing in books has been wrong, and Wikipedia will gleefully continue to publish the old wrong facts because they'll say, well, go change the books and then we'll change the Wikipedia. That's what we do. And so if that's not outrageous enough, at least it's something that we can do. At least it's possible to get all these verifiable facts on the Wikipedia. And my argument is that this is, in fact, why you like Wikipedia. The reason that Wikipedia is working, to put it very simply, is because it doesn't just let you type anything that you want into Wikipedia, like, say, for example, YouTube. So a lot of people, here's some YouTube comments that I randomly screenshotted. A lot of people's basic assumption is if there is one of those little text areas on the internet, that they have an inalienable right to type anything they want into that box. And for whatever they type into that box, they can roll their forehead on the keyboard and then hit submit. And having put words in that box, they have an inalienable right for those particular words to appear on the internet from now until the end of time, until the heat death of the universe, without them being removed, and anything less than that is censorship. That is not actually the case, but that's just something that people think that they have a right to do, and they sort of naturally assume that if Wikipedia lets anybody edit, then they are allowed to edit and put anything they want there, which they sort of fail to reconcile that with why Wikipedia is not full of people rolling their head on the keyboards. The trouble with this rule, obviously, is that you get YouTube comments, but even worse than that is it creates something that is called John Gabriel's Greater Internet. Okay, I'm not going to read that out loud because there might be, you can read that. It's some, well, I mean, there might be kids in the audience, and I don't want to fuck with their heads, but we could call it the internet disinhibition effect, which is that a normal person, then given anonymity and an audience, becomes a very badly behaved person on the internet. So this is generally the rule, and this is why, among other reasons, you don't just have a box that allows people to type whatever they want or add it to the Wikipedia article. I mean, it's there, but it has to be removed. And all of this, like, let's clear out the hoi polloi in order to make a place beautiful, is a sort of a common recurring theme. Sort of one example, which is sort of interesting, is that the Hamptons are a completely impossible beach to get to unless you own one of those $1 million houses that's within walking distance of the beach, because it's impossible to park there. There's no mass transit. There's no hotels anywhere near there. Literally the nearest public parking lot to the beaches are probably a 45-minute walk away from the beaches. And in fact, all the highways that go out to eastern Long Island have been designed with special bridges that are so low that buses can't go on them to prevent people taking buses to the beach in Long Island. But this is nevertheless why people like the Hamptons, because you can go there on July 4th if you have one of those expensive houses, and there won't be anybody there. An example which is a little bit closer to our heart is Linux. If you've ever tried to make any contributions to Linux, especially the kernel, you realize that it's really, really hard to get your changes made in Linux, even though that is the classic crowdsourcing project that was written by 500 million people all over the world, all cooperating to create an awesome operating system. It is nevertheless almost impossible to get anything past the chief head dictator in charge of Linux, Mr. Linus Torvalds. He's been getting more and more prickly about this as time goes on, and stricter about what is allowed. I just selected some comments from his discussion online when people tried to submit changes to Linux in 2011. Why don't we just write code that just works? Why don't we write code that just works? That sounds very ambitious. And then people said, Linus, why are you so rude to the people? He said, I like offending people because I think people who get offended should be offended. This was 2012. In 2013, he had devolved into, I hope I don't end up having to hunt you all down and kill you in your sleep. So it's gotten pretty bad. If you submit a pull request or whatever they call it in Linux land, in kernel land, it's not going to be accepted. Very few of these submissions are ever accepted. And if you do try to submit something, it's likely that Linus will yell at you in public. And nevertheless, this is why everybody loves Linux. This is why it's sort of the #1 operating system and all that kind of stuff. And it's beloved because it's got such strict rules as to what is accepted and how many hurdles something has to jump to get in. And that's just sort of an important truth about user-generated content, which is if you want to have nice things, you have to remove the not nice things. And I think that's a little bit obvious, but again, not immediately intuitive to everybody in the world. And so let me just state that here. Now, okay, so here's the Stack Overflow example. Stack Overflow, again, it's a website with a box where people can type words on the internet, but it's not everything. It's just objective Q&A. All we mean to do, and we use the word objective to mean only things that have a true-false answer that are objectively true or false, not just kind of any random question that you want to ask for opinions. That's all we try to do on Stack Overflow. And this comes from a really, really early observation that none of the people that were making online discussion forums and PHBBB and those discussion groups in Usenet had really thought of, which is that for a typical question on Stack Overflow, there's only one person involved in the actual asking of the question. But there are several people who may answer the question, usually 2 to 4 on typical questions. The average is 2, but you'll see a lot with 4 answers and occasionally something with a lot more answers. But this is what's crucial, is that it's viewed by hundreds or thousands of people. Literally every one of our millions of questions is viewed by hundreds or thousands of people over time. They're all very niche questions. They're pretty long tail, and so it's not common to get something viewed by more than thousands of people. But they're viewed all the time. And so because most of the people that use Stack Overflow are using it completely passively, not to ask or answer, but to read a question and answer that had been put there before, which we call the artifact, we care about the artifact. What's left over from the process of somebody asking a question, got an answer, is the most valuable thing to us. That's what we're interested in. And we care about that more than the actual individuals that were involved in the conversation at the time that the conversation happened, which makes us sort of the opposite of any online discussion forum. This artifact, i.e., I type my question into Google, I'm using Pygame and I have collisions when I rotate things, and poof, there's the answer. This is what we want to happen. This is the magic moment. This is what everything is optimized for this Google search. And that led us to realize that we need some rather interesting rules. And so we introduced these rules and we didn't introduce them right away. Like when Jeff Atwood and I were starting Stack Overflow, it didn't occur to us that we would need these rules. It took a while, and we started seeing people do things, and we started saying, wait a minute, if we let people do that, then this bad thing will happen. For example, we discovered that when somebody asks an opinion question, it generates a lot of heat and no light. So if somebody says, is it easier to program for Windows or for Linux because I need a ... that what you would get is sort of a random flame war that would be a lot of fun to the 8 million participants that would participate in that random flame war that would go on for 900 pages. And they would all be very entertained talking but not listening. And anybody that ever landed on that page on the internet would want to kill themselves, i.e., the artifact that had gotten created is a complete waste of time. You can't possibly learn anything by reading these random flame wars between people discussing whether it's nicer to develop for Windows or Linux. So that's why we decided, wait a minute, you can't have questions that are primarily opinion-based. And over time, we evolved the terminology. We evolved our own terminology. Remember how I was saying in Wikipedia, they were using the word notable to mean something other than notable? Well, we used to call those opinion questions not constructive, which sort of sounds like something that you would tell like a first grader, you're being not constructive. That's not constructive behavior, which means he's hitting other third graders. It's just sort of a school marmy kind of thing to say, I guess, if that's the right word. the other thing we discovered is that sometimes people come on and say, what camera should I buy? And then they would get a whole list of cameras. And we called this the shopping list question. And we sort of wanted to ban these because what we discovered is that the information gets out of date right away, that none of the people that are recommending cameras are actually camera reviewers who have any knowledge about which camera is best. They just have their camera, and they want you to buy their camera because it makes them feel good, not because it's the right camera for your particular application, which might have very specific needs that you haven't bothered to find out. So those shopping lists, again, they generate more heat than light. They leave an artifact on the internet nobody ever wants to read. They don't even get the question answered, and they're sort of a waste of time. All kinds of opinion questions that are pro, con, what I call religious arguments, and my specific definition of a religious argument is the kind of argument that you can have forever because you're arguing about two things that are so multifaceted that the conversation about which one is better and all the pros and cons can go on, again, forever. Anything that generates extended discussion, in fact, generally leads to more talking than listening, and just people sort of typing long essays about why they believe something, which, again, leaves an artifact behind on the internet that makes you want to kill yourself. We also discovered that something that would commonly happen on Stack Overflow is that somebody would be having some problem with their code, and they would take their 15 lines of code or their 50 lines of code or their entire program and just paste it on Stack Overflow. Or our favorite was like, can you go to this URL and tell me why it's not working? And just view source and tell me. And those were not a platform for debugging your code, really. But again, somebody could make that. I don't mind the idea of somebody going and making a website where people debug each other's code. But that's not what Stack Overflow is because we care about the artifact, and that artifact of debugging your code is going to be worthless to anybody. Nobody's ever going to read that and say, oh, I have learned something. And so we call that too localized. And again, the word too localized, those of you that know what localized means, it means translated into another language or prepared for another market and all the other things that you have to do, change the dollars to yens. Has nothing to do with what that was, but this was the terminology that we were using to ban these questions, and that sort of summarized as we're not here to debug your code. We had a whole bunch of rules, and for those of you that needed a summary, we just called it We Hate Fun. If you're having fun on Stack Overflow, you're doing it wrong. We got a picture for it. Stack Overflow is surprisingly not a place for community because everybody always says the online community, Stack Overflow, but it's not really a place for community. That's not what we're trying to do. There's lots of communities online, and they're awesome, and we love them. But this is not what we are making. It's not a discussion forum. It's not a place that's there to enable you to have a conversation. It is not a place for funny stuff or jokes. You can sometimes squeeze a joke in there if you're doing something serious, and we have a couple of good ones. But early on, people suddenly realized that they could get an awful lot of reputation if they ask a joke question or invite people to submit answers that are funny. We kind of had to put a stop to that because that was not creating the kind of artifacts that we wanted to create, which is useful help to programmers that are having trouble and are typing their problem into Google. All it is just this programming resource. And similar to what we are not and what we are, Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. It is not a place to store words on the internet. If you have some words and you need to put them on the internet temporarily, you want to store them somewhere, Wikipedia is not the correct place to do that. Although some people thought that that would be fine. Why does it hurt to just make an article about and put a bunch of words there? And later I can find them as long as I remember what I keyed them off of. But that is not what Wikipedia wants to be. It is not a place to document all dogs. Some dogs, but not all dogs. Not my dog, sadly. Not a place to accumulate the canon of all human knowledge, which you might have thought. This is a more reasonable thing. You might have said, hey, let's put a canon of all human knowledge on the internet. We'll call it Wikipedia, but that is not what it is. It's just an encyclopedia, which is a tertiary source, a summary of current belief, and not a summary of the truth. Okay, so here's a couple of examples just to tell you a little bit of the history of this on Stack Overflow. So in the very early days of Stack Overflow, we weren't even aware that we should have these rules against opinion questions. And we would get a bunch of them, but eventually we started closing them. And when we started doing this, we tried very sincerely to find the right word to describe it concisely why we are closing your question. Even the word closed is sort of a bad word because we kept it around. We just put the word closed in parentheses after it. And we sort of left it around almost as like a hallmark, sort of like when you chop off someone's head and put it on a stick and put it in the center of town. It's like, this is what you do not do. And so we left them around to serve kind of as pathfinders so that the later visitors to Stack Overflow would see all the kind of stuff that we didn't want you to do. And so here's an example of a not constructed question. Web forms developer versus MVP developer, MVC developer, talk amongst yourselves. Andy asked this question, and within minutes, 4 minutes in fact, it was closed as not constructive using that wrong old terminology. So that's one example of something that looks like a debate, and it's going to create a debate. We don't want it because that's not what we do. We don't have debates. Here's another example of the debugging yourself. I'm missing a bracket somewhere, and then he's got some code that's missing a bracket. OK, so the thing I want you to notice here, it may be hard to see on that screen. If you look in the top right-hand corner, this question was asked by one person, as I said. This question was viewed 114 times. 114 people had to look at this page at some point in time. Well, actually, I took a screenshot of it. So 113, like actual people, looked at it. 113 people typed something into Google, and they found this. Well, all right, 112 found it in Google, and one person found it in DuckDuckGo or whatever your local little search engine is here. OK, but nobody else in the world, none of those 112 people, 113 people, actually had this problem. And even if they had this problem, this would not be very helpful because you would have to like look at every single line of code and see if it was the same as the lines of code that you were having, at which point you probably would have found your missing bracket. And there's no chance that you have the same missing bracket. That is just highly unlikely. So therefore, of these 113 people, 113 of them are unhappy at this point, and we have made the internet a worse place, and that is why we have to close questions that look like this. And the funny thing is that, and we used to call this too localized, meaning your problem is in too local a spot. It's too localized to one spot, i.e. your brain. Just so you know, if you ever have a problem like this and you want Stack Overflow to help you, in 10 seconds you can change this to a perfectly good question and the people will help you. What you do is you say, I have some code which looks like this. Here are 3 sample lines. Boop, boop, boop. Give me 3 sample lines of what your code looks like. If I have code like this, what is the best way to find a missing bracket? And then a bunch of people will say, well, here's what to do. And they'll give you a debugging technique for debugging your own code that will teach everybody. And then anybody who goes to Google and says how to find a missing bracket will find this article and they'll be happy. So there is a way to convert this from your little instance of a problem into a problem that can help everybody else, and that's what we want you to do. But the terminology that we were using, as I have alluded to in the foreshadowing to this slide, was problematic. Some of the words we were using were wrong. We were saying closed, and people thought that meant deleted. And it doesn't mean deleted. We have deleted. We delete things. We delete spam. Closed means we are not going to allow answers at this time because your question is stinky. But it's editable. There's an edit button. Fix your question, and then maybe we will reallow answers if you fix it right enough. Again, too localized. We were using the word wrong. Not constructive is that you were a bad child kind of way of saying things. And my favorite, not a real question. Your question has been closed because it's not a real question. And people would look at this and they'd be like, yes, it is. It's got a question mark and everything. Can you say not a real question? It was really fun to close people's questions as not a real question. Because inevitably they thought it was a question. That's why they asked it. OK, so the terminology was sort of problematic. And what it was doing is it was driving away people who were getting angry at us and saying, that was a question, stupid Stack Overflow. And those people might have one day become amazing contributors to our site. And we did not want to drive them away. But worse than that, we weren't even doing a very good job of explaining our philosophy of why we don't allow those not constructive questions and those too localized questions. Because I can explain it here in about 5 minutes to a room full of people, I hope, and mostly get you to mostly understand why we don't allow that kind of question on Stack Overflow. But we were not explaining this to anybody successfully. So what we did is we spent a lot of time thinking about how we actually want to do this. It was like literally a 6-month project to just change a little bit of this terminology around this stuff. And the first thing we do is that the word closed was changed to on hold. So now when your question is closed, it's not closed, it's on hold. So that just says, wait, can't answer yet. Temporarily, we put you on hold. Music plays in the background. Doesn't sound so bad. Too localized. We did an extensive sort of survey of Stack Overflow and discovered that this was extraordinarily rare. That this was not happening that often, actually. Things were not being closed. And so what we did is we just created this rule of what topics are allowed on Stack Overflow. And the rule said debugging your code is not allowed on Stack Overflow. And so we could just say, this is off topic, debugging your code is not allowed on Stack Overflow. And so we just changed that to off topic. In the case of not constructive, the shortest thing we could find that correctly conveyed what we were trying to do without any kind of value judgment was primarily opinion-based. And again, much less of a value judgment here. It's just sort of the cold clinical, hey, your question is opinion-based, so you can't ask it. And then people might say, I disagree with that, but at least they'll say, wait a minute, you don't allow opinion-based? Interesting. And they might try to figure out why you're doing that, as opposed to just yelling at them. And sadly, we had to change not a real question, my favorite close reason, to unclear what you're asking. Again, maybe it puts a little bit more of the blame on you, but it just sort of says, I don't get what you're asking me, so you're going to have to clarify. That is, I think, a much less aggressive thing and a little bit more obvious as to what that means. So this particular change, did it work? I have one slide which claims that it does. So this is the percentage of people who, after having one of their questions closed, then edited the question to try to make it better and get it answered. And it used to be 5%, and the ratio went up to 10% immediately on making this change, like pretty much instantly. Just changing this terminology, those 4 or 5 things, immediately made it so that the number of people who were willing to try to improve their question doubled. Now, a lot of these questions were hopeless, so you have to exclude them because maybe they never would have been allowed. But this really did dramatically improve people's awareness that they can edit a question and try to make it better. We're going to, ultimately, I don't have this data yet, but this all happened a year or so ago, and we're trying to look at the long-term impact on those individual people. Did the people who have a question closed, are they less likely to stick around than people who have a question put on hold, or vice versa, for which we need longitudinal data, which we don't have all gathered together yet. But watch our blog, and we'll post that when we get it. So essentially, this is a summary of what I hope we have learned here. Number one, if you want to have nice things, i.e. if you're trying to create user-generated content that's great content, you actually cannot just allow everything and just hope that it will somehow magically emerge. There really was a brief moment when Clay Shirky wrote that book where there was a belief that amazing content could just emerge from the wisdom of the crowds magically by just letting anybody do anything, and the sum of all that would be useful. But it's not. You can't just allow everything. You're going to have crap. But even more interesting is that the really good community-generated sites eventually, not right away, discover non-obvious rules. They discover, hey, there's this thing that people are going to want to do, and it's going to seem OK at first. But after a year of letting them do that, you're going to start to realize why you really can't let them do that. And when you do that, you're going to then have to delete all those things that people did in the past, and they're going to be sad. And you have to make a new rule. And you've got to be strict about it, or your site will eventually decline into uselessness. Those rules are crucial. Whatever those non-obvious rules are, Wikipedia discovered notability, and we discovered opinions. They are crucial, but most people are surprised by them. If the site creators are surprised by them, it's no wonder that everybody who visits the site and hasn't spent all the time thinking about the functioning of Wikipedia will also be surprised by those rules. And thus, all this adds up to you have to continuously explain to people why the rules are there and what they're for. And you have to look for every possible opportunity to teach people why their article was deleted because it was not on a notable subject, or why their question is put on hold because it appears to be primarily opinion-based. You have to find a million ample opportunities to explain this to people, and you have to kind of endlessly go around on speaking tours telling people why this is. So remember that little chart that I showed you at the beginning that showed that Wikipedia was losing editors at a fabulous rate. They were down from 51,000 to below 30,000. We've been going up the whole time. Users who post 5 times, which is either ask 5 questions or answers per month somewhere on our network. This is a little bit out of date because this only goes to last August, but we are now well past 30,000. I think we're probably at around 35,000. Excitingly, we actually have more people contributing more content to the Stack Exchange network than English Wikipedia. I hope this convinces you that if you pay attention to these rules and you actually pay attention to educating people about what they should be doing and what you want them to do and making it better, then your site will get better and better. More people will contribute, and you can have nice things. Thank you very much. My dog comes here. How much time do we have? Yeah, how much time?
Okay, we have about 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, so we got time for 2 or 3 questions, and
Caller, you're on the air.
Oh boy, I'm a little bit curious, having followed your blog for a while, about the relationship between, if I have this right, it's easy to get people to read your functional specification, just make it funny.
oh,
And, we have Stack Overflow, rule number 3 or 4, don't be funny.
don't be funny. You can be funny. You just have to be on topic. You just can't have jokes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, being funny is fine, but what we started deleting was like actual oh, it would be really funny if somebody asked this thing and we got 1,000 submissions. Like, what's your favorite programmer's cartoon? That's still on there, and it has a big banner saying, we kept this here because it's so awesome, but do not ever do anything like this again because we will delete it. And do not use this as proof that this is allowed, because it used to be under old rules. Yeah, there's a place for humor in keeping people's attention, I think. The other way to get people to read your functional specification, by the way, is use a very large font. That's, I believe, why my blog was so successful. Yes?
Do you do anything to search engine de-optimize closed questions?
Yes, we do. They're not in our sitemap, so they shouldn't really be coming up on Google. If they do, Google is being weird. Yeah.
Okay, well, we do have to set up for the next group of sessions, so thank you very much. Thank you,
Cool.
Joel.
Thanks.